And we're live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A week ago from today, Alberta's education minister unveiled a new draft of K-6 curriculum to be piloted in some classrooms in Alberta this fall. When a Facebook group called Parents Against Alberta's new curriculum draft, I think it has been renamed to Albertans Reject the Curriculum Draft, I'm not sure. But it attracted more than 7,000 members in its first 24 hours. According to cbc.ca, the curriculum experts say that the latest iteration of the document is Eurocentric, dismissive of Indigenous perspectives, and not based on research about how best to teach young children. Parents and teachers are also saying that the new curriculum contains too much memorization in social studies on topics that are age inappropriate for young children. So far, Edmonton School Board, Elk Island School Board, and Wild Rose School divisions have decided to opt out of piloting the new curriculum in their schools. CBE and other school boards are still contemplating. We'll talk about the curriculum in depth with a CBE educator next Monday, but today we're going to be addressing only a specific section that appears in grade 6 social studies, a section of the curriculum, of the draft curriculum. To talk about that, our guest today is Dr. Michael Hawley, who is a professor of humanities at Mount Royal University, and he has been our guest here before. I'll put the link of our previous conversation in the caption. Let's welcome Dr. Michael Hawley.
Hey, Roop.
Hello, welcome back.
How you doing?
I am good. It was cold when you were here last time, and it's warm now.
Well, I don't know. I've had the heater on in this room all day. I've been freezing all day. Maybe I should go outside and walk around. I don't know.
Talking about that quickly, before we start talking about the curriculum, I remember when I was in university, I used to wear sandals and heels in minus 35, and we would go to parties, we'd go downtown, we're walking outside for a long period of time, and I'd be wearing heels, I'd be wearing sandals, no problems. And now you ask me to wear sandals and go to the car outside and to get something from the car, I would not do it.
Oh yeah, no, I'm the same. I'm the same way. I seem to get colder and colder with every birthday. I get colder. So.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Now that we've aged ourselves, which I often do on this channel for some reason, thank you so much for making the time to be here today.
Oh, always fun.
Before we go into the curriculum, I know you wanted to add a disclaimer, so let's do that first.
Yeah, it's not so much a disclaimer as it is. Well, let's first start. It's been a busy week. You mentioned all the Facebook posts that are coming up, the Facebook groups. There's a number of them I know, and people are talking about the curriculum. Some very critical, some very supportive, some sort of half and half. The curriculum, I certainly have not read the entire curriculum. What my interest is looking at the stuff that I actually know. I'm sitting here with you, and I'm not an expert on curriculum. There are people who get PhDs in curriculum development. I'm not one of those. I'm not an expert on child development. I'm not an expert on brain plasticity and learning styles or age appropriateness. That's not what I do. So I'm going to leave those sorts of things to people who actually know what they're talking about, because what I have to say about those are probably not worth the paper it's written on. What I do, as you know, is I research and I teach in the areas of Sikh history, Sikh migration, settlement, and Sikh experience in Alberta. And more generally in Canada. So that's the stuff that I was really interested in sort of finding out, how is that getting talked about and how is that getting discussed in the curriculum. And so that's really what my focus is on. And so what I did is I went through the curriculum and I found the references that I was looking for religion, for diversity, for Sikhs and this sort of thing. And I read those sections very, very carefully. And then did a little bit of a quick find and search throughout the whole document to see if that was consistent with some other things that were said in the curriculum. And so that's sort of where I'm coming from. So I can't address all the things that rightly deserve attention. Right? You'd need 100 different guests.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, of course, the curriculum is massive. Like you said, you actually have more experience in education than someone like me who is just a parent. That's all I am. Like, I have a daughter, and that's all my expertise is.
Is that the harder job?
But for me, like, when I look at the document, it's really overwhelming, and there's I don't know what I mean, of course, like, I can read it and sort of understand what they're trying to get at, but what are the implications of all of that to my child's learning or her future? I don't know. I don't know any of that.
Right.
So that's why we need people like yourself to at least look at the sections or the parts that relate to the work that you do and talk about those parts.
Yeah, and one who sort of teaches and researches in the way in which Sikhs have, in particular Sikhs, but more broadly South Asians, but how South Asians have been talked about in Canada for the past 120 years, and looking at some of the language that has been used to describe these groups. I see a lot of that in the material that I've read from newspapers over the past 100 years, but I also see shades of that coming out in the curriculum too. So maybe it's me, maybe I'm just particularly attuned to that sort of thing, but I zero in on that and I'm able to sort of see some of that language and see the way in which certain groups are getting talked about and how that's different from other groups and how they're getting talked about.
Let me pull that one piece of grade 6 social studies draft curriculum, which I know that you talked about it on your Facebook as well. And this has actually popped up in multiple websites,
Right.
multiple educators have been talking about it. So what about this piece here is problematic?
Big picture for me, Roop, is that this section doesn't seem to grasp the lessons of history that it claims to teach. What it wants to teach is religious diversity, pluralism, acceptance, and those are all absolutely laudable things to teach, and I think that's absolutely terrific. But when we really look at some of the language here and some of the ways in which what they call newcomers and religious faiths are spoken about, that sort of language and that sort of framing really actually doesn't contribute to pluralism and acceptance, but rather that sort of language, we're going to see, it excludes and it really kind of others various immigrant communities, particularly Muslims, Sikhs, and other South Asians. Now, whether or not that's what the drafters intended or not, I don't know. This isn't, I don't know the minds of the drafters. I don't know what they wanted to achieve with it. But all I've got to work with is sort of what is written here. And what is written here, I think, is problematic for a number of different reasons. If we just start sort of with that middle section, that says freedom of religious practice is encouraged, but sadly we know from history that acceptance can come less easily, in part because newcomers bring unfamiliar religious faiths and practices, but fear of the unknown can be no excuse for intolerance. Students will specifically study other faith traditions so that unfamiliar practices become respected and understood in a pluralistic society. Sounds good, right? Well, when we start to, you're shaking your head. No, it doesn't.
Not really. I think they revised that. They added the last couple of sentences after, and they made it worse.
Yeah, the original, and yes, thank you for pointing that out. The original actually was just the first half of this. It said, the original said, if I remember it correctly, freedom of religious practice is encouraged, but acceptance can come less easily, in part because newcomers bring unfamiliar religious faiths and practices. That's all that was said. So the addition of history teaches us, and this idea of the fear of the unknown is no excuse for intolerance, that was all added afterwards. For those of us who want to just sort of take a minute and sort of look at this a little bit more closely, if we look at that passage in that middle column, that question about religious acceptance is talked about exclusively in terms of what they call newcomers, immigrants. And that idea of immigrants not necessarily being religiously accepted, that it comes less easily, is because they bring new and unfamiliar faiths and practices. So here is one thread that we can pull out with this. That phrasing excludes, perhaps, Canadian-born immigrants. What about Sikhs who are born here? What about Muslims who are born here? Right? The curriculum talks about it as though religious acceptance is simply a problem for newcomers, for immigrants. But we know, and you and I know, and lots of other people know, that Sikh kids, Muslim children, lots of others have lots of experiences in school that about non-acceptance, about discrimination, about bullying because of religious belief or religious practice or the way in which they appear. So the way that it's phrased in this part of the curriculum excludes Canadian-born immigrants. Or sorry, Canadian-born Sikhs and Muslims. They don't really fit in. So they need to be brought in somehow or another. Either that or the document is intended to include Canadian-born Sikhs and Muslims, in which case even Canadian-born Sikhs and Muslims are now immigrants. In other words, one never stops becoming an immigrant. One is sort of perpetually an immigrant. And I mean, you know as well as I do that the famous question that always gets asked: where are you from? No, where are you really from? Right? You're always sort of on the outside. And so just that little phrase.
Yeah, just to add to that a little bit, like when we were trying to define what who TC San's audience is, and we had a meeting and all of us were talking about it, and I asked that question, am I an immigrant? And like my parents moved here, I didn't move here. I always feel Canadian, but am I an immigrant? Like, what am I? So that question was there. And then if you see that repeated here in a curriculum, which is going to be taught to young children,
Right.
I think that question will be continually asked by our next generation as well.
Yeah, no, and I think you're absolutely right. And so kids, and this is a grade 6 curriculum, and you could imagine young boy in a putka in grade 6. He either doesn't get spoken about as far as not being accepted goes, right? His experiences of racism and his experiences about exclusion don't get talked about, or they get talked about only because he's an immigrant, even though he might be born here and his parents might be born here and his grandparents might be born here now. And you know, and I think some of your listeners may know, that we have a family here in Calgary who is now 6th generation Calgarian. Are they still immigrants? And when do you get to stop being an immigrant? Right? So I mean, that's it looks like a tiny little problem, but it's huge, and it has implications for the way that other students in the class might see.
Well, this defines systemic racism, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I could, don't get me going. I can say lots of stuff on this later if you'd like. But this is this is absolutely it. So where do Canadian-born Sikhs and Hindus and Muslims, where do they fit into this discussion? Are they excluded? And if they're excluded, we need to figure out a way to bring them in. And if they're included, then they're immigrants,
Mhm.
right? And this is part of the problem. And it also, in this section, frames immigrants as non-Christian. And we know that because in the first column, it says that the majority of Albertans come from Christian denominations, which is absolutely correct and absolutely right, and people should be studying those sorts of things. But if immigrants are non-Christian, it makes them, in a sense, others, and it racializes them. And it racializes them because so often Christians are tied to very often European, Judeo-Christian heritages. So this curriculum, the way it's written, even though it doesn't say it, and it's maybe the intention, maybe it's not the intention, but it brings together, it kind of glues together this idea of an immigrant, race, non-Christian, and other. Those things sort of travel along in a big package. Right? So if you're non-Christian, you're of a different race, a different ethnicity, you're an other, you're right, it all sort of comes together.
Mhm.
So some of the stuff that got added, this was added, I think, April 1st or April 2nd. There's something really kind of odd that happened with the new edition. And if you put yeah, it's up on the screen now. The first part, it says newcomers bring new and unfamiliar religious faiths, and then in the very next sentence we move to fear of the unknown. How do we go from just new and unfamiliar to being unknown and being fearful of the unknown? Why is it being described that way? I'm not saying that religious diversity and different religions shouldn't be taught. That's how I make my living. It should be, but we have to watch the way in which we talk about these sorts of things. And the other thing that really got me, I'm sorry, I'm going to get on my soapbox here. The other thing that really got me was that little reference right near the beginning that says history tells us that religious acceptance is difficult. Right? We know from history that acceptance can come less easily. Well, yes, history does teach us that. The curriculum is absolutely right when it says that. But so too does what's happening here and now, what's happening on the news, what's happening with Sikh men, Asians, what's happening with the
I
hijab women in Princess Island Park.
Sorry to interject, but when I first read it, to me, it feels like it's almost being justified that it's okay if it is coming, like if it's hard for you to accept something that's not normal or that's not you or something that's unknown. It's okay to be afraid of it. I don't know. That's like the first reaction for me, as I'm not reading it with a critical eye, but I'm reading it with my perspectives or my stories behind me. When I'm reading it, first thing that really leaps out at me is that it's okay. History tells us it's difficult to accept, but let's try accepting these people, these unknowns, of fearful unknowns that have come into our country.
Right.
So somehow, like, it's making it, normalizing it. I don't. Yeah, that's really uncomfortable.
No, and I think you're absolutely right, Ruth. That's right, and that's and keep in mind that teachers are going to be reading this as well and interpreting it the way that they feel best, in the way that they think is most accurate. But they're bringing their own experiences to it as well. So this idea, though, that this sort of stuff is just in the past is problematic. Right? This idea that we know from history, well, we know from the present. We know from, the grade 5 and the grade 6 student who's been picked on or beaten up or whatever at school. That's where it's happening. We know it from the present. We know it from watching news. We know it from, riding on the LRT, right? And we see it all the time. Mm-hmm. So there's an attempt here, at least this is the way I read it. There's kind of an attempt here in the language to say, but that's in the past.
Yeah.
Right. That this sort of exclusion and discrimination and these sorts of things, that was really, really common in the past. But we've kind of come a long way from that, and we're now sort of better than that. Which, you know what, there's something to that. However, it's still a problem here and now for so many, and that certainly doesn't get addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
No, absolutely. I think these are the conversations that we need to be having, and we're not having these conversations. And perhaps if it wasn't the research that you've been doing, the work that you've been doing, you may not even pick on these little things. Like a lot of immigrants, again, I'll speak from my experience. This is my lived experiences. My parents, they did not have time to look into the curriculum, like none of them. Like, and perhaps they didn't even have the resources or the access, or they weren't aware. Maybe perhaps there's more awareness now because of internet, but a few years ago there was no such awareness. And for me, and I find myself I would say that, relatively speaking, I am more informed. I read, I keep abreast with the new changes, whatever is happening in the school system, and yet I find it so overwhelming to read this document and trying to figure out if this is good for my kid or not.
No, yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. In trying to sort out and read through what really is sort of a very, very specialized document it's hard to do. Absolutely.
And racism does begin at that level, like that systemic racism that we talk about. This is where it starts, and this is what it looks like, and this is what needs to be pointed out, and hopefully it will be addressed. I'm going to read out our Minister of Education's statement here from her press release on March 29, 2021, recently. The new curriculum delivers on our commitment to Albertans to refocus learning on essential knowledge and skills in order to give our children the best possible chance at success. Parents and teachers have waited a long time for this, and I'm pleased to say that we've delivered. Another promise made, promise kept. I know, Michael, you have different views on to that. I want to get to that quickly here. Alberta's government remains committed to a transparent review process. The draft K-6 curriculum is now online at alberta.ca/curriculum for all Albertans to provide feedback until September 2022. In fact, I want to encourage everyone who's listening in today to please go to that website. I will put that website down under here as well. There you go. So do go to that website and make sure that if you can't read the curriculum in its entirety, read the parts that pertain to your children or pertain to your son and your daughter. So read those parts and provide your feedback. It's very, very, very crucial at this moment. We, like we've discussed for the last 20 minutes, like Dr. Hawley has been talking about, that particular section is problematic, and the reasons that he's already talked about. If you find them problematic, here's your chance. You go to this website and you provide your feedback. All right. So
can I jump in on that just for a minute? And if you are concerned one way or another, if you like it, if you don't like it, if you have criticisms to make or whatever, make sure that you do not only do the surveys, but actually write a letter to your MLA, and write a letter to the other side as well. So if your MLA is UPC, also write a letter to the opposition. So both sides know exactly what people are thinking.
I love it how you always call it UPC. Like you haven't changed that.
Oh,
you always call it UPC.
UCP. I'm sorry. And I don't know why it's in my head that way. I don't know why, and it has been. But you're absolutely right. And every time. UCP. Maybe I haven't UCP, that acronym. I don't know.
Since UCP came about in 2019, or was it earlier, 2018? You've always called it UPC.
I know, and I don't know what it is. It's every time, and you know what? I'm going to end up keeping doing it, but I know what it is. Really, I do know what it is. Yeah. So let both sides of government know. Right, so that each side knows what the other side's reading as well, right? So
do go to this link right here and make sure you provide your feedback. Anusha said, how often does this curriculum review come up? I'm so unaware also, and overwhelmed also. I think we'll have an educator actually. She is coming next week, next Monday, who may be better equipped to answer this question. But if Dr. Hawley, if you want to take a stab at it.
I don't know what the system or the protocol or process is for whether or not curriculums get reviewed on a regular basis. I know that it was being reviewed during the last government, and I know that there was I think a newer one put in by the Conservative government, not UCP.
But PC.
No, that I think came about in 2005, I think.
It's been a while. It's been a long time.
So it's been a while, but yeah, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't say how frequently it is or what the process is. So sorry.
There are actually, I've been reading about it. They said there are parts of the curriculum that are really outdated and need to be changed and replaced. And that's why NDP started the process. And then when UCP came, they brought in a new team of people to look into the curriculum. And what UCP says is that they've listened to Albertans, and Albertans want to go back to the traditional way of learning, which is a lot of memorization and a lot of talking about historical facts and memorizing those historical facts, which the current educators don't agree with. And also they don't have enough time in the day to be able to teach that. But we'll talk about that to Sonia next week.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, there's that. I don't want to sort of come across saying, you know, I think this, you know, section is terrible and it should get absolutely thrown out. There's actually I know there's actually a really fairly simple fix to this section. And largely, that's simply taking out the references to ethnicity and immigration, right? We can talk about, this section is devoted to religious diversity and pluralism. Well, let's talk about religious diversity and pluralism. Why do we need to bring in ethnicity? Why do we need to bring in immigration into that conversation? That's not saying that can't be done. I mean, my God, I make a living doing that. Right, talking about all of those things. But at a grade 5, grade 6 level, we can talk about multiculturalism, diversity, pluralism, without bringing in those other things. And those other things about immigration are talked about they're dealt with in other places in the curriculum. So it's not like students aren't learning it. It's just that maybe we should disconnect it from questions about multiculturalism and religious diversity.
Well, that was lovely. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Hawley.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I was thinking that we'll go over 30 minutes, but we did it. We're under 30, and we managed it. I do want to mention once again, because let me pull that up again here. It says that the feedback until spring 2022, so you have time. It's not like they're starting this curriculum right now. So please go to the website and provide your feedback so that it can be fixed.
Right.
All right.
Can I add one more thing, Ruth?
Oh, absolutely. Any parting thoughts? I was going to say.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and this is just sort of to make sort of a larger point that this one section that we've talked about here, it does fit with some of the other things that are being characterized in the social studies curriculum. So, for example, if you pull up the curriculum and you search for the word pioneer, what comes up with pioneer are European names, Black names. Interestingly, there's a great recognition of Black contributions to Alberta, and sometimes connected with Chinese communities. Sikhs and Muslims are not described that way, even though they've been in the province for a century. Europeans alone are described as explorers. Explorers don't apply. That the label doesn't apply to any other group, even though we have people like Joseph Lewis, who was the first African-American explorer in Alberta in the early 1800s here. Ethnic are used for people of non-European descent. Canadians are seen as ethnically neutral. And if you put those two things together, we're back at that othering stuff that we talked about right at the beginning. Anyway, there's lots to work with, and lots of criticism and lots of work, I think, that needs to be done on the curriculum. And it's something I think that needs people. We need to get feedback in there, and we need to start correcting some of these things.
Feedback is important.
Yeah.
People's voices need to be heard. That's really important, and that's what we're doing here today. Explaining what your perspective is, my perspective is, and encouraging our audience to please go onto the website, read it for yourself, and see if it bothers you, or if you think there is something that there should be fixed or changed. Please go ahead and give your feedback. All right. Well, thank you so much. Like I said, I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Sat Sri Akal.
Sat Sri Akal. See you.